Soviet Union was not the friendly ally portrayed in the newsreels. Compared to the dreadful bloodshed of World War I, Britain lost less than 500,000 servicemen and just 70,000 civilians. It is a fact of war that it is in defeat that armies are destroyed. Victors rarely have to pay heavily for their triumph. The United States fought largely a winning war. With a maximum of 16.5 million under arms, less than 300,000 Americans were lost. Perhaps less than 10 U.S. civilians were victims of the conflict. The number of deaths in the major combatant nations overlies a long catalogue of suffering, of death and loss that reached into all corners of the world. As many as 55 million lives were lost all over the planet. From when we first realized that now is preceded by a before, we become aware that we're traveling on a timeline of history that is personal and unique, and yet is intertwined with the big flow of history. The history of World War II is perhaps the defining moment in the history of humanity. Yet the place of the war in history is not absolute and fixed. It's a different thing to different people. The people of Germany, Britain, and France talk of World War II, 1939 to 1945. The people of Russia of the Great Patriotic War from June 1941 to May 1945. The United States of a war beginning in December 1941 and lasting until August 1945. For China, the war began as early as 1937. When did the war really end? The history of World War II is heavily laden with irony. The Nazi delusion and the Stalinist paranoia that the alliances and antagonisms of the war would somehow realign came true. A post-war Nazi plan dreamt of a united Europe, with the Mediterranean South turned into a holiday playground for the North, with a single currency controlled by the German economy. Japan talked of an Asian co-prosperity sphere, where the states of Asia, free of colonialism, would become independent leading economies, with Japan in the dominant position. The war becomes ever more remote in living memory as historians stand ever further back from the big picture of the 20th century. It may be that World War II is seen as part of a conflict that began in 1914 and ended in 1990. As the Russians finally left, as communism crumbled across Europe and a reunited Germany, a democratic Germany was allied to its former enemies in an ever closer political and economic union. There can only be a handful of people on this planet unaware that the war happened. To surf through the documentary programs of a multi-channeled media world is to experience a place where somewhere Hitler is always speaking. The tanks are always driving forward. The bombs are always falling. If we are unaware of the history of the war, then we know its mythology, where fact merges into fiction, in the Hollywood epic and the TV sitcom. Impossibly handsome commandos are always mounting daring raids on secret weapons, and bungling bank managers forever play slapstick comedy in Britain's Home Guard. A Spitfire victory rolls in the clear English sky of 1940. For the people of Britain, the Battle of Britain was fought in the heat of a glorious English summer. That is a myth. Records detail a climate wetter and cloudier than even the normal summer. The Red Army fights alone against the Nazi invader. It did not. Only American boots kept the soldiers fighting. For many nations, the mythology of the war remains a definition of national identity. In 1,000 reruns, it is the finest hour once more. We live with the results of the war and are, ourselves, the consequences of the war. If we seek any further evidence that our timeline is entwined with that of Hitler, Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin, we need only look at our own family history. The war was a time of passionate and hurried marriage, of shattered expectations, of futures and dreams lost with boys who never returned, of moments seized right here and right now for fear that happiness might be lost forever. Many of us owe our ancestry to the war, to parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents who met because of the war. Evil will always be present in the world. Its eradication is not in the power of men. Yet, if there was ever an action by men that aimed to eradicate evil, it is that war waged upon Nazi Germany by Britain and America. The history of the war is a complicated weave of the politics of national self-preservation and of power games. Yet, refine and reduce that history to its elemental facts, strip away post-war maneuvering for power, and the war is a struggle between good and evil. The world will never be free of wicked men who will arise, and through sheer aggression and envy, tap into prejudice and the basest of instincts. These men will start wars and will perpetrate terrible cruelties. It is only through the history created by the millions of individuals who fought and died in World War II that we, in the present and future generations, shall know the dictator and the aggressor, and shall see the ideologies of hate and evil for what they are, wherever and whenever they arise. The lesson of the history created by those millions of men and women to both present and future is that we must never forget.